Homes, businesses, and schools everywhere have been dazzled by the phenomenon of the internet over the past 2 decades. However, sometimes people don't realize exactly how the tools they use work. They don't realize that what they are really using are servers. For my freelance project, I took on the task of learning all about servers with Mr. Rose. We've learned so much, but it seems like we haven't even scratched the surface. Even though it feels like we've barely progressed, this video will show you what we now know. When you first start planning for a server, there are several things that you must take into consideration. 2 essential questions that must be asked are, what do you need to build the server, and what is it going to be used for? Let's address the first question. What do we need? If you're starting completely from scratch, first of all, you're going to need money, and a lot of it. Good server equipment and software is not cheap. As far as hardware and supplies go, here's a list of key items. Cat5 cables, hard drives, patch panels and switches, network drops, backups, and of course, the computer, which includes HD, display, security, display driver, inputs including the keyboard and mouse, motherboard, power supply, fans, graphics cards, RAM, CD and DVD drive, network card, and CPU. That's if you're just going for the basics. After you have all of the hardware, you need server software. There are many different types of server software. The 2 that we primarily focused on were Mac OS and Ubuntu. You are also going to need to plan for other things that you will need, which brings up other questions that you have to answer. The entire process is sort of like a chain of questions. You're going to have to address a plan for security, inside and out, how it will be powered, whether it will be wireless, and how you're going to provide the manpower needed to keep it up constantly. Alright, now to address the next question. What is the server going to be used for? There are many types of server services. A few of the countless examples are iTunes, email, HTTP, SQL and database, peer-to-peer like Skype, MSN, and LimeWire, video sharing, DNS or the domain server name, DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, file hosting, SMB and FTP, the File Transfer Protocol, and LDAP, which is the Directory Access Protocol. You must ask questions. What is going to best suit the necessities of your server? How can we make it more user-friendly? Will it allow for expansion? How much does it cost, and can we meet those costs? You also should ask about aesthetics, reliability, continuing maintenance, the initial setup and time, speed of connectivity, accessories, storage, location, network topology, connectivity, clients, management, backups, whether or not it's easy to troubleshoot, and if there's support for troubleshooting, security, and you need to address whether it needs to be open source compatible. All of these things need to be addressed when you're choosing your software. If you're setting up a server for the first time, you might want to get someone that's experienced to help. There are many things that can go wrong, and it's difficult to troubleshoot if you aren't familiar with what you're doing. In our simulation with Mr. Rose, we started with our 4 computers. We simply used a switch to connect our computers together. The power supply went into the wall, which went into the hub. The Cat5 cable went from the drop to the hub, and then Cat5 cables came from the hub to each of our computers, creating a network. We were all connected to each other and the internet. When we first started off, we didn't have a GUI, which is a graphical user interface. All we had was a black screen with a white flashing bar. When we were setting up our accounts, we learned a lot about permissions and troubleshooting. It took us a few tries before we all had the correct type of server chosen. Anyway, we all created our root names. The root has access and can give permission to do virtually anything on the computer. Beyond the root, you have administrative users and regular users. An administrative user has more permissions than other users, but more often than not, the administrator needs a root password to make major changes in the system. After we initially got logged in, we all looked at each other kinda clueless. The server system for Ubuntu was set up similar to Terminal in that it received text commands and never really showed you whether you were going anywhere with what you were doing. We learned and forgot countless commands. It is very overwhelming to try and learn or explain the way a computer with strictly text commands works. It is basically a system of directories, and each directory has a certain purpose with certain files. When you're looking at a GUI, you don't have to worry about anything like that because much of what the computer is doing is running in the background. When you're working with strictly text commands, you have to tell it to do each individual thing. A few of the commands that are essential when considering directories are cd, which simply stands for change directory. Just in case you have no idea what directories are within the directory you are currently in, you can type in ls, and it will give you a list of directories. Keep in mind that commands are different for every server system, so these might not all be universal to each system. Once you view the list and pick a directory, you simply put in cd space and then a directory name. Bin, for example. Once you are in a new directory, it will show up along the left-hand side of the screen along with your username. It is set up in the format user@host:\$, and then it gets longer as you get further into different directories. For example, on my account, I was crazychrissy@stuntmanmac:\$, when I was at my home directory. Add a /bin on the end of that and it would show what my name would look like if I was in the bin directory. Once we ran an ls on the directory, it came up with a list of things that we had no idea how to use. For example, one command it showed was kill. That was pretty self-explanatory. It stops any program that you tell it to on a dime. However, some of the complicated acronyms were more ambiguous. For that case, you could type in the command man for manual on different commands and a screen would show up that told you exactly what it did and how to use it. If you tried something and you did not have permissions, you would have to use the sudo command. The sudo command allows you root accessibility. After you type a sudo command, it will ask you for a password and then proceed on. Commands get more and more complex after those simple ones, except for the date, which showed the exact date down to the second. So enough of that. After a few days of learning about commands, we got a GUI! We were so excited, and we also didn't know what to do. The GUI made our computers look more like the computers that we were used to looking at. We could still use terminal to give the computer commands and practice with the commands, but that wasn't all we had to work with. This is where we started learning about the software part of setting up a server and networking. We used Firefox to access Webmin with our GUIs. I still don't completely understand Webmin and everything it does. I know it's remotely accessible from any computer as long as I have the root password for my server computer. Webmin also allows you to add new users to your system and assign permissions to each of them. It was a big accomplishment when I added Tanner as a user and we could view each other's printers. It was an even bigger deal when we figured out how to share files. However, the entire process was extremely complicated for sharing documents. Webmin can be used to add other features to your server as well. It gets very complicated just like the system of using commands does, so I will leave it at this. Webmin controls things on your server computer. It may not sound like we did much, but ever since we got the GUIs, we've been experimenting with all of the possibilities. Besides the basic components of building a server in our simulation, we learned other things. We learned about file systems. A file system can format a volume. This gets kind of complicated, but I will try to explain it. A volume is similar to a disk drive, but a disk has a low-level format and is partitioned by volumes. You can have multiple volumes in your file system on the disk. Each volume has its own file system as well, which is where something called FAT, or a file allocation table, comes in. FAT is a database that keeps track of where all your files physically are on the disk. Different versions of FAT have different limitations, such as the amount of characters you can use in a file path. Different server systems use different file systems. The disk, or hard drive, can come in many forms. It started a long time ago with punch cards. Now there are hard drives all around us. Some examples are CDs, DVDs, cassettes, floppy disks, magnetic media, and USB memory. Hard drives also have a number of interfaces such as IDE and ATA, SCSI, and USCSI. You can physically see SCSI bus cords inside of the computer if you look. They're very long and they've got lots of prongs. And lastly, SATA, which is the one that's most commonly found today. Remember that a hard drive is simply a storage medium and nothing more. A server can be anything with the right software. Even an iPod can be a server. I hope that you got some insight onto servers through this video. We're still learning. We haven't learned the half of what there is to know, but now we know more than we did all the same.